Got it.
Got it.
All right. Okay, excellent. So for today, we have a couple of learning objectives, which is understand the variety of career paths for science and mathematics, PhDs and postdocs, as well as really learn about the tools and resources for career exploration. There is a lot out there and it can be pretty overwhelming. So I want to provide you with a few key tools and resources to help you with doing this exploration, because ultimately you need to do a lot of this on your own and set goals for your next step in your career exploration process. Because, again, I think this is kind of a long-term project and you'll need to, have smart goals to ensure that you're continuing within your career exploration and hitting those goals as well. Okay, so we have a little fun activity actually today, which I stole from or borrowed, let's say not borrowed, but I took from Shrikant Iyer, who is actually part of the Science Alliance. Some of you might have been at his presentation, and he had this great kind of way to get people activated in our presentation. So I shared a Google Drive with you, or a Google file, where it allows us to kind of get a sense of like who's in the audience today. And I wanted you to be able to also get a sense of how you're feeling. So I know this says post-graduation. If you're a postdoc, you can just say postdoc, right? So here's who's at the party here. So take one of these dots here. You can actually move them around. I'm moving one right now, the one that's going crazy. And you can put them wherever you feel along this spectrum. So we can get a sense of like, are you feeling very excited, not excited? Also, if you do not have access to this slide, please write your email address into the chat and Rachel can invite you to this slide. I tried to invite everyone, but it seems like some folks from the medical campus sometimes can't get access. So if you have issues, just drop into the chat your email address. Okay, so I'm seeing really kind of across the board on this first one, I'm feeling scared. And some people are feeling really excited and some people are in the middle, understandably. It is a really like career exploration when you're just starting it and kind of beginning it can be really scary, let's say. And most of you are constantly thinking about what you're going to do post-graduation. Yeah, I hear you. As someone who thinks about career all day, I'm with you there. I'd put my just thinking about careers all the time. And then most of you are kind of feeling like I have few options. I have a few options considering beyond academia, which is great. Some people are not sure what they're qualified for. Well, no one feels completely unqualified. So that's great. I'm really happy to hear that kind of coming from a place of strength, feeling like you do have some options. And then, oh, great. So we have folks, some people actually like meeting new people. And then no one's saying that the word network makes them cringe. Very impressed here. Someone was like, actually, absolutely, it makes me cringe. Okay, well, yeah, more people are feeling that way. I'm seeing that coming in now. Again, networking is one of those things that I think it's particularly the way that it's done in America is very, can often feel maybe a little pushy. People feel uncomfortable, maybe tooting their own horn, as we say, or making themselves like inflating sense of ego, things like that. But really, it's all about how you present yourself to others. And again, very American, how you sell your skills. So thanks for playing this little game with the slide here. So we're going to go back to our presentation. And really, kind of get back into it. But thanks again for doing this together. Let's go back to, here we are. Okay, hold on. I need to bring it up. Excellent. Okay. And I'm going to bring up my notes as well. All right, so we have some career myths that are really common. So in the Office of Graduate Career Development, we do one-on-one career advising, and these are actually often myths that I talk about in one-on-one advising appointments, which are a lot of PhDs and postdocs often feel like, no one would hire me. I have no useful skills. That's not the case. In a moment, we're going to talk about transferable skills, but you have a lot of skills. I just think that sometimes it's finding the right words to talk to people in industry about these skills. My dissertation or my research is my most valuable asset. That's not necessarily true. Again, you have a lot of different valuable resources and assets that are beyond just your research and maybe bench work that you're doing. I'm sure that if you start to look at your resume and really think about it, there are things beyond your research that you can bring to the table as an employee. Third, if I don't become a professor or a bench scientist, my PhD or postdoc was a waste of time and effort. No, you're really developing essential skills here. It can also seem very scary to transition career paths. And so, I think that I mentioned these PhD pathways conversations that we have with alumni, and they did mention someone recently who left academia kind of having to mourn the feeling of not becoming that professor that they might have seen themselves, 5 years at the beginning of their PhD. They didn't get to achieve that. And so they did have to mourn that process of that this did not come true, but they found a very fulfilling career outside of academia. Sometimes it just takes that transition time though. And some people that really requires rethinking your identity and who you are and how you've defined yourself so far and finding a new path and a new identity. Because I do think often, particularly in American culture, we really wrap up our own identity in our career often. Fourth myth, jobs in industry and the people who work in these positions are just boring. A lot of you are here already to learn about non-academic careers, so maybe you don't think this, but I do think that that's often, or they're dumb, which isn't often the case. I think it's really about finding a work culture that interests you. And we'll talk about values in a little bit. And so then I am both over and underqualified for most jobs. Again, this is something that we hear again and again and again, and it's really about how you market your skills to employers. You have control over how you're perceived by employers and by people that you're even networking with. So it's crafting a narrative that speaks to the experience that you've had as a researcher, as a graduate student, and describing those skills to someone else in a way that they understand. And again, we can talk about ways to do that. But I think that this being both overqualified and underqualified is a huge myth that I hear a lot about. Also, something to consider that careers in industry often result in higher salaries. And actually in 2020, in every broad field of study, median expected salaries for doctoral recipients committed to jobs in industry or business were higher than salaries for those who are committed to postdoctoral positions or jobs in the academy. So, you can definitely make more money. Often there's better work-life balance in positions in industry. That's something that's becoming more and more common to keep and retain workers and to ensure that you have work-life balance, and that you can often contribute to innovation in the economy with the skills that you're learning as a researcher. So just wanted to kind of maybe bust some of those myths, maybe something you've been thinking about yourself. So here's some skills that all graduate students and postdocs develop. So, all of you are researchers, right? And so, thinking about how do you translate this into words that someone else and non-academics can understand. You're determining the best approach to a question. You're finding relevant data. You're designing a way to analyzing it, understanding large amounts of data, and then synthesizing your findings and persuading others of your conclusions. These are all bullet points that you could put on a resume, right? Written communication, you're writing papers, thesis, a dissertation. All of this is written communication, which is so important to any job. Project management, so you're breaking down a huge project a huge thesis, a huge research project into small parts, actionable parts, that's project management, working with deadlines. So leadership, that can be mentoring or teaching. Let's say you're TAing a class or being part of a classroom setting, that definitely shows leadership. Critical thinking, really being able to evaluate and analyze information is so important. Collaboration, so knowing how to divide up a task, communication, resolving conflict. And then public speaking, so that can be class presentations, conference, poster presentations, and teaching. All of these are skills that you've developed as a graduate student or as a postdoc. And so we again wanted to kind of go back and have a little fun with this. So we wanted to start from a place of strength. So we're going to go back to our Google Slides here. And if you want to, this is something you can do. You can grab this first slide here and you can duplicate it by simply duplicating the slide and then add your name to it. Here I am, and then a strength that you might have. So here I am, Francesca Pinelli, and my strength, I'd say, here I am, I'm doing some public speaking, I'm giving a presentation, and here's a GIF that describes my strength. I love Pusheen, and here's Pusheen, kind of teaching someone else or giving a presentation to this strange wiggly cat on the bottom. Feel free to do this, have a little fun, think about your strengths here, see what your colleagues are saying. Persevering, I love it. Learning how to pivot, right? Again, this is from Shrikant Iyer, who gave this excellent presentation, and I think we really thought this was clever. And we wanted you all to think about the strengths that you have. And you can think, if you're not sure, think back to that list that I was showing you, right? Of communication, of project management, of teamwork, of leadership. You all have these skills. I think sometimes it's just a matter of like finding them in yourself and thinking about your experience and being reflective. And being reflective is a really, really important part of career exploration. So I see some of you working on this. Great. Max Pfizer. Yes. Policing. Yeah. Focus on my strengths as a way to stimulate personal and group excellence. I seek to transform something into something superb. Very nice, Drew. Like that. Anyway, so I'm going to go back to my presentation, but please do fill this out and think about this. And think about, what's great is that you all have access to this presentation now. You can come back and see what your colleagues are writing in this. Again, just a little fun activity to maybe make it feel like we're more in person together. So where are the PhDs or postdocs? So there's a lot of research that's been done about this. And so you're not alone. Many people transition to fields outside of academia. And here are some organizations that fund and look into career paths of both our PhDs and postdocs. And some of you might be even funded by these organizations, such as the NIH or NSF. And so the PhD Pathways, this is a project of the graduate schools, and they work with 60 university partners to track PhDs. And so, they also look at a great resource is the National Science Foundation conducts a survey of earned doctorates every year. And in a moment, I'm going to show you some slides, as well as I really wanted to, there's some articles in here that Rachel's going to drop into the chat about kind of this exact question of where are our PhDs, where are our postdocs going? And there's a great article about kind of like the next generation of biomedical and behavioral sciences researchers breaking into new fields. But as I mentioned too, so these are just some resources for you to look at another time that I found really helpful in kind of preparing for this presentation and thinking about this presentation. So I wanted to share those with you as well. But I also wanted specifically to look at our the survey of earned doctorates. And I'm gonna actually go ahead and like not look at, we're gonna look at this instead of the slides that I've put together. So hopefully you can see my screen. And we're looking here at post-graduation trends. And so this is from 2020. And as you can see here, and I suggest, just spending some time looking at this, you're looking at, so for those who have answered this, the survey, that we're looking at post-graduation trends, and it's often the first position after earning a doctoral degree. And we see that after, so you can see life sciences, you go by these are where people who have definitely decided or committed to something after their PhD. And where are they, how many people are able to find positions? So you can see in the life sciences in the year 2020, close to 70% had a commitment after their program. Mathematics and engineering higher, engineering, social sciences, and earth sciences, again, about 70. So you can see that there was a dip there, and then it's coming back actually up to, I'm interested to see if they were to do this again in 2020, what that looks like. But as you can see, this is information about where people are actually going and who has commitments. These are non-STEM fields, but then, okay, so this is by people working in the academy or academia. And as you can see, it depends, it goes again by your discipline, as well as postdoc positions. So, how many people in the physical sciences, there was a real peak in there in 2010, and now that number is kind of, declining again. We're looking at mathematics and computer sciences. Actually, that number again is kind of declining. So you see where people are, and then, if they're going actually into a postdoc, what by, as I said, like field of study. And then median salaries. I thought that this was really interesting. So you can see that in all of these, so mathematics and computer science, who are employed in a position in industry or business. And then you can actually also see how much money they're making, which, again, I'm pretty certain that, a position in academia right away is most likely not going to pay over $100,000. So a year. So just, something to consider. And so I'll drop this into the chat because I think that this is just really interesting data and wanted to share this with you. Oh, Rachel already did that. Thank you so much. Yeah, so just a little information about who's doing this research and what the findings are. Okay. So this was, again, this was from 2016. You can also see humanities and behavioral and social sciences. So again, who's finding employment, who's going into doctoral study, and how many people overall have a definite commitment. Also, again, looking at employment sectors. So industry and business are across the board one of the higher areas that people are going into, as well as nonprofit organizations and government. So again, this is from 2015, a little bit older than what we were looking at. And then again, employment sector, again, you can see humanities and behavioral science, as well as engineering, life sciences, physical sciences, and where they're going. So again, just some information, and this can kind of maybe help guide you in thinking about some of your career exploration. All right, so now we're going to be discussing tools and resources to assist you within this career exploration. So here are our methods. And what we're going to advise is really, as I mentioned, continual self-reflection. So asking yourselves, like, what do I like about my graduate school or my postdoc? And what do I want to change? Setting aside some time to really reflect on these questions and thinking about, what do I enjoy? What do I not enjoy? And then how can I maybe, if you identify those areas, finding what you're not enjoying can often also spur you to, do different types of work. So there's many self-assessment tools where you can have a clearer picture of your skills, your interests, your values, and your personality. And in a moment, I'll go into some more of those in greater depth. There's also one-on-one career advising. So for students at the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences, you would be coming to GSAS Compass, Columbia is very confusing. Each school has their own career departments. Postdocs, you have the Office of Postdoc Affairs. And for those of you at the School of Engineering, you have your own placement officers, as well as those working in the Office of Graduate Career Development there. So I believe all of you have access to one-on-one career advising. I'd highly recommend that you do not pay for outside resources, because you have experts already that you have access for. You're technically, already provided with those. So internet research is also incredibly important. So there's, post-PhD blogs, articles. There is some links that we have that I'll go ahead and post into the chat, just kind of thinking about like the Cheeky Scientist and other areas that you can do research on these types of careers, as well as LinkedIn is a great place to do research about career exploration. I know it can be really overwhelming. I think often there's like lots to click on, lots to get lost in, but it's an excellent way to learn about specific companies, organizations, job postings. Following companies on LinkedIn can be incredibly helpful. Again, they often tell you when they're hiring. So LinkedIn can be a really helpful tool. And if you have a LinkedIn profile, make sure you're updating it. I'd highly recommend that. And then, of course, you shouldn't only be doing things alone via the internet. You need to also talk to people. So having informational interviews with folks to learn more about their career and to see if the tasks that they do in a career or their everyday tasks that they are performing in their job match with your own skills, your own interests, and your own values. And then, of course, if you can gain experience, volunteer, get active on campus, if you can find internships. Again, going back to these PhD pathways conversations that we have with PhD graduates who've left academia, they always talk about gaining, if they didn't gain experience outside of academia, they said that they wish they had. So actively, and I know it's really hard if you are working in a lab to find extra time to do internships during the summer or during the year. I do understand that, but I think that there are other ways, such as maybe even volunteering, being a leader in a student organization can really gain valuable skills and don't necessarily require you to even have an internship, right? I think volunteer opportunities can be really helpful as well. So now I wanted to get into some assessment, self-assessments. So some of you took an assessment, the strong interest inventory. That's one that's like a little more, let's say, there's a lot more information in that one, but there are some very great free online resources as well. Often you have to pay for the strong interest inventory assessment, but here's some great free ones. And so maybe some of you are already familiar with my IDP from Science Careers or my individual development plan. And some of you might not be as familiar with Imagine PhD. I would actually say that taking the assessments on Imagine PhD might be even more helpful than even my IDP, just because it's a little more up to date. Again, it's a way for you to really look and ask yourself, reflect, what do I like, what do I not like? And here I'll go ahead and just show Imagine PhD, because maybe some of you, so this is really meant for the humanities and social sciences, but I do think it can be incredibly helpful for those in all different areas. And it's completely free. And here's these assessments. Each of them take about maybe like 8 to 10 minutes total. And you can go ahead and think about, again, your interests, your skills, and your values. And then it pops out your top 5 interests, skills, and values. And then imagine my IDP, again, it has these skills and assessments too, and it is more scientific based, more STEM focused. So I would say, maybe do both of these. I think that it couldn't hurt, to try and use, as I said, Imagine PhD is just updated a little bit bit more, I think, than my IDP. So that's why we do recommend it even for non-STEM disciplines. But then from there, you receive results, and then you can consider career fit, because it has been shown that if you work in an area that more closely aligns with your skills, your interests, your values, you will have greater career satisfaction. So using these online tools can be really helpful. And then from there, just again to show you my Imagine PhD, you can go ahead and learn about different job families in areas and see if your interests and skills and values align with them, very similar to my IDP. And so I guess, let me be a little clearer about what I mean about values here. So like, what type of work environment would you like to work within? Who would you like to work with? And I think sometimes that's often overlooked in assessments. People are just thinking about their interests and their skills, but I think also considering, do you need a place with work-life balance? Are you really interested in, do you have interests outside of work that you want to be able to nurture? And working in an environment that allows you to have greater work-life balance would be important for you. So I think values are something that aren't necessarily considered in self-assessment, and I think that both my IDP and Imagine PhD account for these, which is great. And they help you narrow your options of industries. So as I said, if you understand your interests, your skills, and your values, you can see which industries use those skills and those interests. All right, so again, just a little bit more about interpreting these results. So interests, I mean, you can explore those job families, as well as consider if you have you might not have any interest in areas that you're actually really highly skilled in. So let's say you're someone who might work with, run live experiments, maybe with mice, but you don't actually really enjoy that work. That's something good to reflect on, to say, okay, I might be highly skilled in this, but this is something that I don't necessarily want to continue as an interest. Or, as I said, identify tasks you don't enjoy so that you can kind of, avoid those later, as well as identifying the ones that you do. Finally, and then skills, being able to articulate your skill strengths is really important in talking to others, that informational interviewing for jobs as well. And so it's really important to consider, to know your skills, to know your strengths, and to identify areas of weakness so that you can grow those areas. Maybe you can do that through a volunteer position. You're really interested in learning more about communication, and maybe you join a student club and become someone who does their newsletter. It's a little bit of extra time. You have to take time away from your postdoc duties or your PhD duties, but it can be ways to grow those skills. And then finally, those values. So, and I think that, having, working for an organization that aligns with your values. So maybe you're someone who's really interested in focusing on climate change and ensuring that the organization that you're working for is trying to make an impact, a positive impact, rather than, a place that doesn't describe it or mention it at all within their company culture. They don't recycle at all. That's probably not going to be a good fit for you if you're someone who's really very, as we all should be, very concerned with our environment. So again, just another area to consider. So here's some resources. I know that this is a very dense page, but I think that overall, I wanted to just share these resources with you because it's important that you do some of this online research. So here are these, so intersect job simulations, awesome, really cool. You can go through a task, they have science careers, and it just, here, I can show you one. Job simulation. I love this. It's such a interesting resource that I think just anyone should be aware of. And sorry, it's taking a minute to come up. Here we go. view resource. So like, what does it mean to actually do like market research? Hold on, let me share my screen. Not sharing it yet. Here we go. Okay, so this is Intersect. They have, as I said, these job simulations, exercises for career transitions. And so you could go ahead and what does market research again mean? Here's the process, here's an exercise, tasks that might be assigned to you. Here are the skills that you're using. Again, do they align with those skills, or is this an area that maybe you need to develop further? They have, again, from the humanities to the sciences, to developing a course, science communications, and you can learn a little bit about what doing that work is like. So this is a really helpful resource that I think is pretty fabulous. Also, inside higher ed careers, the Office of Postdoctoral Affairs, if you're not a postdoc, you might not be aware of them, but they have great workshops and they often offer those resources up to PhD students as well. And we advertise those in GSAS Connect, which is the resource that GSAS students use for all things careers. So you should be familiar with that. Science Alliance, Science Careers for the PhD. SEPA has great career fact sheets that I often share with students in my one-on-one advising appointments, as well as HERC has great information about higher ed jobs, not only in teaching roles, but faculty, but also staff positions like, career advising, or I know many science PhDs who now work within higher educational admin staff roles and really enjoy it. And then finally, we have our own webpage and a little just document often where our STEM PhD students go, and then short explanations about that industry, kind of like Imagine PhD or My IDP, but a shortened version online there. So I just wanted to highlight that. Okay, so now that you've done, let's say you've done all your internet research, now you really want to learn about. So ultimately, your career advisor that you probably talked to at the engineering school at GSAS or at the Office of Postdoc Affairs probably hasn't worked in the industry that you're interested in. I've never actually worked as a UX researcher. I don't know what that would be like. So finding someone who has done that work, it can be really important to ask them questions. So informational interviewing, people power, so important to career exploration. It's really essential. And I have a PDF that I'm going to just drop into the chat that's all about how to run an informational interview. It's for students, postdocs, and PhD students, and it really just walks you through the steps. I'll go through them quickly, but really, it's an informational interview is a 20 to 30 minute conversation where you learn about someone's career path or about maybe their current role. You're the interviewer, so you need to lead the conversation and ask questions. And so this document that I just dropped into the chat is really helpful with creating those questions as well. So they help you gain industry-specific information, including hiring practices of a job function. Certain industries, maybe consulting, have really very accelerated hiring practices. They hire almost a year in advance to someone starting a position. And you can gain that information online, or maybe you can find it in person, but sometimes, again, career advisors are often generalists, and so it's really important to chat to people doing the work to find out what is the hiring cycle. Again, identify skills and knowledge gaps. So maybe, you can say you've done all these assessments, your strengths, your key skills, but maybe someone working in this industry says, oh, actually, you also need to be someone who's really skilled in Python. And you're like, well, shoot, maybe I better take a Coursera course on Python to be better in this area. Learn about other possible career paths. Some people create their own jobs. I knew someone who once held the title of Director of Strategic Initiatives. It was kind of something that she made up. She was working within higher education, and she just knew her strengths and kind of sold that to an organization to say, I can see that you have gaps in your development or your programming of this university, and I'm going to help you identify that. Great. So you could talk to someone like that and hear how they made that job and kind of how they came to it, right? So I think sometimes you can find about those opportunities that might not be readily available in an internet research. And these allow you to gain confidence about your professional identity and really improve your interviewing skills. So if you're someone who, you know, doesn't love talking about yourself and highlighting your strengths, that is really a requirement though of interviewing for a job. And so you can practice it in a safe environment, which is more of an informational interview rather than an interview for a job. So informational interviews just allow you to practice this in a safer setting, let's say, in the one that is not so high stakes. Maybe that's better than saying safer. It's not as high stakes. And of course, it expands your professional network. And really, I like to call networking really just relationship building or building a community of people, because it's an exchange of ideas and information. It shouldn't be transactional. It's really developing relationships with other people. And of course, hidden opportunities. So, someone that you're talking with might say, oh yeah, you're really interested in working at my organization. Well, we're going to be hiring soon and I'll send you those jobs. That's rare, but sometimes it does happen. It's a good thing to, keep in mind. Who should you interview? Start with your comfortable connections. Again, low stakes. Start with low stakes folks. So that's friends and family. People, you might have a friend working in an industry that interests you and you talk about your life and your family and your dog that you just got, but you might never ask them about their work. So spend some time and ask those, those folks to talk a little bit about their experience in their job. Often junior faculty or faculty with off-campus connections, asking them if they also, have people that they could connect you to, or maybe even former colleagues, someone from your undergraduate institution even. Those are great places to start with. And then warm connections. So that's maybe someone you don't necessarily know, but that you have a shared history with. So as I mentioned, I guess warm connection would really be, as I mentioned, undergraduate. But this could be someone, so alumni overall. So this would be an alum from Columbia or from your undergraduate or from high school that you've never met before, but you have this shared history of going to this institution, and then they'll be more likely to chat with you. People from professional organizations, guest speakers, anyone who's maybe come and was a presenter for the IDP series. There's someone that you could connect to on LinkedIn and say, I really enjoyed listening to your presentation. Thank you so much for the information. I hope we can connect on LinkedIn. Even though you might not have met in person or even asked a question during that, you can say you are a participant, and that's reason enough to maybe want to connect to someone on LinkedIn. And then of course your first and second degrees on LinkedIn. So second degree on LinkedIn means that you know someone who knows that person. So if you have a shared connection, they'll show up, and could be a really good person to ask for an informational interview. How to conduct one, I'm just going to go through this really quickly because you have that guide, but ask them about their present. So learning about their current role and their current responsibilities. And then of course the organization itself. What is it actually like to work there? Do people go home at 5 o'clock or do they stay until 9 p.m. every evening? It's a great question to ask, again, about that work-life balance. And then ask them about how did they get there? How did they find their first job? What resources were you using? If they're a recent grad or someone who recently made a transition into academia, they might have, outside of academia, they might have better resources than someone who's done it 10 years ago. So just kind of keep that in mind. The way to look for jobs now has greatly changed. So if someone's a little bit older and they're talking about their transition, the information that they give you might be not as relevant, but just something to consider. And what was your interview process like for your first job and subsequent jobs? Again, that insider knowledge. How did you interview? What was the process? That can be so helpful. And then where do you see yourself going next? You know, career is an ongoing process. It never ends until we retire. And a lot of us are retiring in 70, 80. People are working for longer and longer now. And as we live for longer periods of time, you know, often many people have many different iterations of their career. So where do you see yourself going next? I love that question. And then any advice for me? Like, I think also a great question is, will you be willing to look at my resume? Because again, resumes might look very different depending on industries. I'm a generalist. I can give you a general overview of a resume, but I can't tell you what a resume should look like for this tech company. And it's great to maybe hear from someone working in the organization. And sometimes people like big companies like Google often have even videos about how to make a great resume. But if you can hear someone who's actually working there and get feedback, that's nice as well. And then what resources or skills should you develop, right? So it's all about that skill development, trying to identify those skill gaps. Also, informational interviewing is a great way to kind of ask hard questions, and maybe I'm going to help you think about these a little bit, because if you're talking to someone and say you want to learn about a consulting career, right? And the assumption is that there's a lot of long hours and it's a ton of travel, but you don't want to say to that person, so are you so tired because you're just working crazy hours? Like, that sounds so tough. And they're like, maybe they're gonna be like, oh, thanks a lot. So I thought you wanted to hear about my career, not like criticize it. So you could say instead, how much do you travel in a typical month? And what is the amount of, and is it possible to control? Is there some flexibility there? Or even just ask a simple question, what's your work-life balance like? Asking open-ended questions, not yes/no questions, are a great way to get information that you want without putting assumptions or placing assumptions on the question, right? The assumption of, don't you have crazy work hours? Is that they do. So instead saying, what is your work-life balance like, is a great way to ask a delicate or a question. Science writing. So you need to start it by freelancing. That's a common assumption. So you could ask the question about, like, how did you get into science writing? Is it necessary to do freelance work? So this is a little less delicate, let's say, but this is a good question to ask, because again, we often talk to students who are like, okay, well, maybe would you be interested in, high school teaching? And they might say, oh, well, the salaries are like really low. But then you talk to someone who's maybe working at a private institution instead of a public one, and that could be different. So figure, again, asking those questions. So what's the typical salary range? This works across the board. So instead of asking someone, how much money do you make? I think that we should be more transparent in our conversations around salary, but I think there's still some taboo around it. So you should ask about salaries, but you could just say, what's the typical salary range? So that person doesn't have to tell you exactly how much money they're making, and maybe make them feel a little uncomfortable. Or like, if you want to ask about helicopter parents, like, what's the school culture where you teach, or what are the parents like? So again, not putting your assumptions that parents are helicopter parents. Research and industry, that lack of intellectual freedom, is that in fact the case? Like, how much opportunity do you have to do exploratory research? And finally, intellectual property, again, do you need a law degree? I have seen organizations that will actually help you pay for a law degree as you go and work with intellectual property. So it really depends on the organization. And so asking someone about it. And if that person did go to law school and it's required, do they know anyone who works in the field who didn't go to law school? So always asking the person that you're chatting with if they have in fact someone else in their network you can talk to is a great question to ask during your informational interview. Who else in your network that I can talk to? And often they'll be more than willing to open up their Rolodex or their contact list and provide you another contact. So for those of you already in a postdoc, you might know some of these, but for those of our PhD students, just kind of wanted to go over the postdoc question here, which is, what are the pros and cons? So the pros are, it gives you more time for career exploration. right? It gives you a little bit, and often a postdoc can be a new exploratory experience. Maybe you're using new techniques, maybe you're doing a new line of research, and it gives you a chance to develop transferable skills, and a chance to publish more. And often postdocs are in fact required for academic positions. So that's, good to keep in mind. However, there are some negatives in that it can further delay a career transition. So, you're going to be spending more time doing maybe academic research rather than transitioning into a more industry-based role. So, it is something you kind of have to keep in mind. And you could be unhappy or trouble motivating to develop certain skills if you already are burnt out in your PhD program. If you're like, I am so tired of bench research and I don't want to do it anymore, the idea of a postdoc might not be the right fit for you. And then your research, it could be unsuccessful or not or couldn't translate to maybe industry. So think about maybe even the type of postdoc that you were doing. Is this something that could in fact translate into industry? So here's some tips. There's also postdocs in industry. There are organizations like Merck, like large pharmaceuticals that do postdoc positions, as well as some research institutes. So think about that are more industry based. Carefully consider the research itself, the work environment, in professional development opportunities, because eventually after this postdoc, you're probably still going to go into industry if that's of interest to you, and making sure that it translates easily outside of industry could be a huge help. And start to begin planning your exit strategy, because you want to think about what you're going to be doing after that postdoc. Set goals and deadlines for yourself. With this, maybe you only want to do, we recommend only doing really one postdoc, because sometimes that can lead to another, and you're just kind of like in postdoc land of many postdocs. And some people have been able to land academic jobs after many postdocs, but some do not. So you might want to consider, you can run 2 parallel searches as well. You can search for postdocs, you can search for non-academic jobs at the same time. I know it's kind of a lot and they're very different timelines, but I think that you can also consider doing both. So let's think a little bit now about these action items and how you can go ahead and really consider setting yourself up for success. So I'm sure all of you have heard this, SMART goals, right? They should be specific, measurable, actionable, relevant, and time bound, meaning that you need a specific goal. It needs to be measured in a way that, when do I know it's done? It should be achievable. It should be relevant to your main goal of finding a job. And it needs to, of course, as I said, have a deadline, be time bound. So here are some samples. You're just going to go from here of SMART goals. So maybe it's completing the Imagine PhD in My IDP assessments, and give yourself a deadline. Or maybe it's conducting 2 informational interviews in this month. I'd highly recommend that for those who are deep in career exploration or will be graduating soon. Setting goals like this, devoting an hour a week if you can to career exploration, is really helpful, because this takes a while, okay? And so, as we say, work backward from your anticipated graduation or the end of your postdoc, because all of this takes several months. So self-assessment, like really reflecting and asking yourself questions, can take time. Research and exploration, again, that takes several months. Now, career exploration is not linear. That's why we have it in this cyclicals or circular kind of method, which is all of these can be happening at once, but do keep in mind that self-assessment, career exploration, networking, all of these are really ongoing. Developing a professional network takes an entire lifetime, and something that you just don't stop doing once you have a job already. You should continue to develop a professional network. However, it does take about 2 to 4 weeks to prepare your materials. I strongly suggest that you have them looked over by someone else, and consider that it takes about 4 months. It takes anywhere about 4 to 6 months to actually find a job. I know many people, it's taken more than 6 months to find a job. So allow enough time for that application process. All right, well, that brings me to the end of today's presentation. I'm going to stop recording so we can open it up for some questions.